Donald J. Trump has been gagged again. Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is overseeing the federal election case, reinstated a gag order telling him to stop targeting potential witnesses, prosecutors, or court staff. Trump is also under a gag order in a New York civil fraud trial, which he was recently fined $10,000 for violating. Joining me to discuss, Barbara McQuade, a veteran federal prosecutor and former U.S. attorney, and Mark McKinnon, former advisor to both George W. Bush and John McCain. He's one of the co-hosts of The Circus on Showtime. Barb, let's start with this federal election case. What does Chutkan's gag order do? Does it matter to Donald Trump?
I think it does. He makes a living out of with his words and by targeting people, which this gag order prohibits. Now, she carves out an awful lot of room for him. He can criticize the Justice Department. He can criticize the Biden administration. He can criticize the case, and he can even criticize the judge herself outside of court. But what he can't do is to go after, she uses the word target, individual parties, individual witnesses, or jurors, or do anything that would compromise the safety of those people in this case. So it's a pretty narrow gag order, but he has demonstrated over this little hiatus while it was being suspended, while she considered whether there should be a stay during appeal, why it is so necessary when he targeted people like Mark Meadows and then William Barr. And so it's back in effect, and the real tricky part will be how she enforces it.
Mark, this weekend on The Circus, you solely focused on Donald Trump's legal issues. What is your big picture take?
Well, we looked at the morass of all the legal entanglements that face Donald Trump and really tried to take away the brush to really get down to the fundamental question of, is he going to be held accountable for anything? And is he going to be held accountable before the election? That's the key, really. I mean,
if it's not before the election, then it won't happen.
If he's elected president, first of all the federal stuff goes away. And then the state stuff gets delayed until after he's president. Almost unquestionably, most legal experts would agree with all of that. So the only way he's going to be held accountable is if he's going to be held accountable in any of these trials. And what seems clear is that it's the federal case with Tanya Chutkan that is likely to happen. She has held firm to this March 4th date. And despite lots of motions and a lot of arm waving from the Trump team, she's holding really solid. And so we talked to some people who are very familiar with her and have covered her. She's had 31 January 6th cases come through her court. All 31 have been found guilty and sentenced. And not only sentenced.
All those people are sitting in jail.
They are. And not only sentenced, but in many cases, she's gone above and beyond what was recommended for sentencing. Tougher.
Barb, an Alabama man was indicted for threats against Fulton County DA Fani Willis and the Fulton County Sheriff. Is enough being done to prevent these threats?
It's a challenge, Stephanie, because, one of the consequences of the kind of reckless talk that Donald Trump engages in is that you never know who might be taking the bait and acting out on it. Threats are bad enough, but as we saw, there was an instance after the Mar-a-Lago search when he accused the FBI of planting evidence, when a man went to an FBI field office with an assault rifle and was killed in a standoff. There was also the pipe bomber who was dubbed the MAGA bomber because he was a fan of Donald Trump and was sending pipe bombs to his perceived enemies. We live in really dangerous times. And so I think, a gag order is one way to prevent all of this, but it's really impossible to stop all of it. I'm pleased, though, to see law enforcement take aggressive steps to do all they can to send a message that this kind of violent rhetoric will not be tolerated.
Mark, Donald Trump is still the front runner. There's a new poll out that in Iowa showing him up by 30 points. Do you put a lot of stock in that, or you think it's still very early in anybody's game?
I think it's early. There's a lot of time before the election, and Iowa's such a different animal. And
why?
Just ask President Howard Dean about Iowa. They're very deliberative. 75% of Iowa voters are still open to voting for somebody besides Donald Trump. They famously make up their mind late and fast, and in large numbers. They can move in a really wholesale fashion. So
they know that's their power.
Yes, they do, and they take it really seriously. So momentum is key, and Nikki Haley's got some out there right now. And I think that voters are going to look at this, and they're going to, if they're open to somebody besides Trump, they're going to say who's got the best shot. And, maybe it was going to be DeSantis, maybe Haley. But if Haley really starts to get some wind in her sails, I think a lot of people will peel off of DeSantis and the other voters and go to some. So if Haley runs even a strong second, for example, I think the only shot where Trump's threatened is a Haley surge in Iowa. She maybe runs second. she just does well. And she's doing real well in New Hampshire. So she does well in Iowa, and she goes to New Hampshire, wins New Hampshire. And then it's the man who would be king. If he bleeds, the former president, then it could collapse quickly. That's unlikely, but possible.
He could collapse in New York this or next week, Barb. This week in the New York civil trial, Don Jr. and Eric are going to testify. And next week, Trump himself and Ivanka is rolling into town. What do you expect from this?
I think it'll be very interesting. One thing I'll be looking for, Stephanie, is whether any of these witnesses chooses to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. While they can't be charged criminally in a civil case, of course, anything they say in this civil case could be used against them in some other criminal case. And so sometimes witnesses choose to invoke that right during testimony in a civil case. But the tricky part for them in a civil case is that, unlike a criminal case, the judge may draw an adverse inference against the witness. That is, they may assume that the answer would have been unfavorable to the witness who invokes that privilege. And so that makes it have some consequences, but also there's some risk if they don't invoke. So that's something that'll be really interesting to watch as all four of these witnesses take the stand.